Cool. So yeah, thanks Will for joining us today. So you've talking to you looks like you're quite passionate about sort of the Power Platform, and you had some quite an interesting journey sort of getting to where you are today. I'm really keen to see what you're going to be talking about sort of using the Power Platform and how that sort of helps within sort of the Teams environment, and how sort of the low code, no code is transforming the industry. So without further ado, over to you.
Okay, so my presentation today is going to be about how to capture Teams praise. So if you're a user of Teams, you'll be aware that you can send praise to people, and you do that by just tagging the word praise in the Teams chat, and clicking on the result, and a window pops up where you can choose what kind of praise it is. There's a choice of about 9 or 12 different things like teamwork, leadership, achiever, whatever. Add one or more names to it, and a personal message. You can write what they're what you're giving them praise for, right? And it's great because it's good to leave praise for people, and it's good to receive praise, but it disappears off the timeline pretty quickly. So this is about how to capture that and store it so that you can report on it. So there we go. So here's a little bit about me. So I used to work as a consultant in the small business, kind of small to medium business managed services space. So working at the OS and infrastructure level, which is basically installing and supporting Windows servers, Azure cloud management, identity management in Office 365, all that sort of stuff. Just kind of keeping the lights on, basically, in small to medium businesses. And then around mid 2018, I discovered low-code development, actually initially with Logic Apps, but Power Automate, or Flow as it was back then, fairly soon afterwards. They're pretty much the same thing for what it's worth. And then quite late in 2018, I attended a Power Platform bootcamp, which was being run by Rich and Paul, two local MVPs here, and we did a sort of build an app in an afternoon type thing, which was a visitor sign-in app, and it was a great kickstart to actually get into Power Apps and kind of understand how it works with expert help right there. And I was instantly hooked. So I got pretty bored pretty quickly at that point of managing servers. And in my old job, I started getting into writing a few apps to do various things, like internally, and even a couple for customers. But I left there mid 2019 and joined the company I'm at now, and I'm now the technical lead of a 4-person team, which is soon to be 5-person team. We've just hired a new person, so we're going to be 5 when we come back in January. And apart from tech, I did actually take a career break. It's going back a few years now, but I was a ski patroller for 5 years at Mount Dobson Ski Field near Fairley, and I'm currently an operational member of Christchurch Search and Rescue. Here's my LinkedIn profile. You can, I'm sure, sorry about the numbers, but just type my name in if you want to find me on LinkedIn. So who are Tribe? Tribe is now you might wonder why I'm waffling on about my employer, right? I'll get to that. But Tribe is a managed service provider primarily. Most people that work at Tribe are doing the sort of stuff that I used to do. Managed service provider for the small to medium enterprise market, with a head office in Hastings in the Hawke's Bay. But we've got offices all over the country, including Christchurch, where there's about 10 of us. So we've got about 70 staff in total, all around the country. So Teams is heavily used. Pretty much everything that we do in the company happens in Teams. We don't really send emails to each other ever. So it's very much a Teams adopted company. And it was a big change from my last workplace, where we had Teams and there were channels and Teams created, but nothing ever happened in them, and everyone used to just email distribution lists. And we value customer relationships above all, really. It's just the focus of the business is on just looking after the staff and staff looking after the customers, and that basically drives the top line. And part of the means that we do that is just by encouraging a positive work culture. So we've got some pretty good systems in place to keep everybody engaged, and this basically is part of that. It was an idea that our chief executive came up with. He floated it. Is there a way that we could do this? I'm like, hold my beer on. So here we go. This is the business improvement team. This is we call ourselves the BI team. There's 4 here. There's soon to be 5. Our new person. I can't say who it is because I don't think they have handed their notice in yet. But we will be 5 in the new year. And we are a little, I wouldn't say silo because we do cooperate with the rest of the business, but we do a lot of work for our MSP customers. They hand jobs to us, you know, when say for example, they do a server migration or they upgrade desktop workstations or something like that. And they find that there's some guy in the accounts department that's got some macro enabled Excel spreadsheet that they need to then go and dial back all the security and add the trusted locations and all that stuff that you've got to do to get the code to run. Or, you know, they might have moved someone into OneDrive from having local profiles on the server for their H drive or whatever they used to call it. And these kinds of problems start to crop up, right? So they can sling them over to us and we can go through the process of, you know, getting rid of all those access databases and Excel files and putting them in Power Apps and you know, augmenting that with Power Automate and so forth. So that's what we do, and we just consult on business improvement. Sometimes it doesn't even involve doing any low-code development. We just tell them that their processes need this, that, or the other, right? So that's us, and that's our team here, and I'm the technical lead of it. So why capture praise, right? So it feels good to acknowledge your colleagues, doesn't it? You know, if someone's done something that's, you know, worthy of mentioning, it's good to do that, right? It feels good to acknowledge your colleagues, and it also feels good to be on the receiving end of the acknowledgement as well. So storing and reporting on the praise kind of drives that behavior a little bit more, because basically, I've said here, create a hill for people to die on. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, if you gamify something, right, you can make it a competition, and you can drive a lot more of the behavior that you want by doing that, right? So if people can see where they stand in terms of how much praise they're giving out, or even receiving, but giving it out is the important thing, right? Then you're going to drive more praise and more of those good feelings. So that's why we're doing it. And what better tool to do that with than Power Platform? So we use Power Automate to capture the praise and triggered on when a new channel message is added. It's one of the standard triggers that there is. We do some processing, firstly to establish that the channel message in question is actually praise, because you can trigger on any channel message, but there's only certain ones that are actually praise, and drop the details of the praise into a table. Like SharePoint list is the obvious one, and you can quickly provide some insights directly back into the channel by way of replying to the message. But you can also store the praise and present it in a Power BI report, which you can embed into SharePoint, and you can put it as a tab in the Teams channel as well, so it's right there for everybody to see. So we'll start with the data. So for this, I just use the SharePoint list. You know, and whatever data source you use in your company. I mean, if you're in Dataverse, you can use that, SQL, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But in this case, I've just used a SharePoint list. So it's really basic. It's just got a whole bunch of single line of text columns. The title, which is just there anyway, from to the praise type, and the message is a multiple line of text, because you can actually put in more than 255 characters into the Teams praise window, so it needs to be longer. And then we also use the created date time field as well in the Power BI report, but you know, you don't add it because it's there by default anyway. So that's what the list looks like, an empty list just with those columns. So the first thing that we've got to do is trigger this thing when a new channel message is added. So in this case here, I've just specified the team in the channel, and then there's also some trigger conditions here. And I put these trigger conditions in just to try and reduce the number of triggers, the number of runs that get triggered. So these three things here, I'll go on to the next page, you can actually see them, but these three things are only true if it is praise. Now, there are some instances where these three conditions could be met when it's not praise, so we still have to do a little bit more later on, but those three trigger conditions will filter out most channel messages which are not praise. And this is what they are at the top here, so in blue. So basically, what we're looking for here is the attachments, right? So if this screenshot here on the left is the payload of a channel message, which happens to be praise, right? So this is a JSON document, and it's got, oh, pardon me. Oh, there we go. So it's got a property here on line 36 called attachments, and I've highlighted in yellow there that that's an opening square bracket of an array, right? So a praise message only has one attachment, so it's a single item array, right? So we want to grab the first item of that and check that it contains the words sent praise to. You can see it here, right? So the content property of this first attachment item is a serialized string. It's a serialized JSON document. You can see all these line breaks in it. Basically, it's a string. It's surrounded by double quotes. So we can just use the contains function to search that string for the substring sent praise to, right? Tick. The next one is that the content type is application/vnd.microsoft.card.adaptive. All right, so that's another thing that will only happen if it's praise. Now, any adaptive card that comes through a channel message will have that, but it's unlikely to also contain the word sent praise to. Not impossible, but it's unlikely. And we also want to make sure that there's more than 0 mentions in it as well, because an adaptive card being sent in a channel message with the word sent praise to is possible, but if it doesn't have anybody mentioned in it, it's definitely not praise. So we've got to meet those 3 conditions to trigger the flow, right? Here we go. So once we've done that, we'll start processing the channel message, right? So as I mentioned in the last slide, the attachment content is a serialized string. So we need to deserialize that, convert it into a JSON document so that we can actually index it, reference its properties and get the data out using, functions. So the first step here is just to get the attachments content, and it's just wrap the JSON function around that, the first attachment, the content property of the first attachment into JSON. So we go from this highlighted in yellow here, this serialized string with the line breaks into, on the right, an actual formatted JSON. So we're just turning that string into JSON data. That's just the first step. And now what we want to do is just check that it's in the right format. All praise, basically the attachment item is adaptive card is an array. It has one item in it, right? So you're not going to get multiple attachments, multiple adaptive cards or any other attachments in a praise channel message. So we just want to check that that's definitely equal to 1, right? The length of the attachment. And secondly, it's got items. So there's another array inside it called items, which needs to have 4 items in it, right? So if it's a single item array with an items property that has got 4 items inside it, then it's highly likely to be praise, right? So we're just basically validating the fact that it's definitely praise, right? So if those numbers are true, if the outer array has a length 1 and the inner items array has a length of 4, then we pass through the yes branch of this condition, and if not, we just terminate the flow. It's not praise. If it's got 3 or 5 or 0 items in these properties, then it's not praise. So yeah, here it is, right? So this body here, this is the what we're seeing here in black is that deserialized JSON document of the attachment content, right? So it has a property called body, which has got 1 item in it. You can see the line down here, 1 item in it. And then inside that, there's a property called items, and it has these 4, right? So we're just counting those. And then there's just a little bit more that we want. I mean, to be honest, if you're building this yourself, you might skip some of this stuff and just go, yep, that's enough to be sure that it's praise, right? And maybe there's a chance that in 50 years of your business, nobody will ever create a channel message with an adaptive card that contains the words sent praise to, right? And happens to be, you know, have a container with that number of items in it, right, that isn't praise. There's a chance that that might happen and that this flow will error out, or there's a chance that it won't. And now I'm kind of the school of thought that you should build it robust so that it's never, ever going to fail. And that's what these steps are for here, right? So what I'm doing here is basically just filtering this items array for filtering these items arrays for the type text block, and then you notice that the text blocks, only the type text blocks has a property text. The others don't. Here, there's the image there, doesn't have a text property, and this is in 2 steps. And to be honest, it only needs to be 1 really. But yeah, so what I'm doing is just filtering out the image and then looking for sent praise to in a yeah, there we go. So we're filtering items for the type is equal to text block, and then the text property contains sent praise to, right? And if the result of that is 1, then it's definitely praise, right? And if it's not, then if it's 0 or 2 or any other number, it's not praise, so we can terminate the thing. So nobody can trick this flow into accidentally logging praise that's not praise, right? No matter what people try and do, I think. So that's done, right? So we've now established that the message is praise. Most of the filtering is actually done in those trigger conditions, but then there's a few steps below that just to be absolutely sure, by making sure that the adaptive card that comes in the payload is exactly the right format in terms of the properties within it and the number of items in the arrays and the text appearing where we expect it to be. So we've done that, and that does 2 things. One is it stops any non-praise being pushed into a database, but it also stops the flow from failing, because what we're doing here when we actually save the praise is we're referring to specific index numbers of the items that are in these arrays. Now, if we hadn't done all of that validation prior to this, then we would get unexpected results if non-praise managed to get through all the previous checks. So yeah, all we're doing here, right, is getting the details of the mentioned user. So this goes into an apply to each, because as I said earlier, when you initially log praise, you can put in multiple names. So it's only fair that everybody mentioned in the praise gets recorded as having received praise rather than just the first person. So we'll put it in an apply to each. For each mention, we'll get the details of the mentioned user. You can see the ID of the mentioned user appears in the payload, and it's not their UPN, it's just their Azure AD GUID. And luckily, the Office 365 users connector, even though it tells you UPN there, it says user brackets UPN, undocumented feature, it will actually also take the Azure AD GUID of the user too, so that's lucky. So we stick that in here and it will resolve to a user. And then the next step of it is we'll take the from, so this comes straight from the trigger. The from user display name is directly from the trigger of the person who actually created the channel message. We'll put the display name output from the Office 365 connector there into the two. And then the praise type and the message, I've put the formulas here. So it's basically the second and the third. So if I look at the praise type, if I go back one, two, right. So if we look at the praise type, we can find it here, alt text. So what we're looking for is the 0, 1, 2 alt text problem solver. There it is. So in array index 2 alt text property, we get problem solver. And array index 3 text property 0, whoops, sorry, shouldn't have clicked on that. 0, 1, 2, 3 text property test praise there. So that's where we get the data from. So that gets saved into a SharePoint list. And now that could be enough, right? But it's nice to just provide some instantaneous feedback to the person that's left the praise. So I thought personally it would be a nice touch just to let the people know straight away, or within 3 minutes or whatever the trigger poll interval is, of how many praise they've left, and also provide a link to the Power BI report as well. So I've got this scope here called follow-up actions. So what we do is we just get items. This is a get items action in SharePoint, and I put this filter query in. So the created is greater than, and as we all here on this side of the world know, when you're dealing with SharePoint or any UTC timestamp for that matter, and you're so far away from UTC that you have to do all sorts of stuff, right? So yeah, time zone conversion, basically get the start of the year, basically is what we're talking about here, and from this display name as well. So that will give us all of the praise, or all of the rows in the database that correspond to praise that's been left by this particular person this year. And we're not going to do much with that, but just count it with the length function, so we know how many there have been, and then just reply basically, whoops, into the Teams channel with praise added to the praiseometer, and that there is a hyperlink which goes to powerbi.com where the report's published, and then the name of the person. So that there's just first split display name on the space, so it's just got the person's first name, has given length of get all the praise for this year, praise this year, keep them coming, and that's what it looks like. So in this case here, I've done this under a service account called Power Platform, and it's just responded to praise to say that Jamie's given 40 praise this year, and then the next time you do it, it'll say 41, 42, and so on. And then finally, the very last step of this is just to refresh a data set, right? So we've got the report that's published to the Power BI service, and it's not got a scheduled refresh, it just gets refreshed when praise is left. Now, in our organization, we don't generally have more than 8 praise being left a day, but it can happen, right? So I've left the refresher data set till the very last step, so I don't have to handle error. Because if we get to number 9 on any given day, that's more than the Power BI Pro license allows you to do. So if that last step fails because it's the 9th one in any given 24-hour period, then it doesn't actually matter. And to be honest, I don't care. I don't catch or handle this error in any way. It doesn't matter, right? Because the Power BI report will be updated the next day when someone leaves some praise. It will update it with the next, the one that it failed on plus the one that's been left that day. So not really too concerned. If you were, I mean, I suppose what you could do in here is that you could have a branch off the, with a run after has failed and then a delay for 24 hours and refresh or something like that. But in this case, I just refresh the data set and that's that. So let's try it out, right? So I've got a window here. So this is the flow, split into 3 scopes. Now, the reason that I split these into scopes is just because, well, in my production one, there is error control. So what I do for each scope is I put a parallel branch in and add a new scope, and then I'll run that on failed, right? And in here, I'll use the result function to get the result of this scope, and then filter it for status equals failed, and then have a channel in our basically Power Apps developers team that we've got called error notifications, and we'll post an adaptive card into there which will have the details of what's failed. So all of our workflows, all of our flows and logic apps that are running in the entire company will basically just get the results of any failed scope, and then just push them. I've got a logic app that's triggered on an HTTP post, which is the sort of error receiver, and I push them to that, and that posts the details of what's failed, the name of the flow or the logic app, the workflow run ID, the action that's failed, and so we can keep track of it. But I haven't done that in this demo because I just wanted to keep it simple. But that's why I use scopes, and that's why they're all there. That's a bit of an aside. But yeah, we have these scopes, establish whether the message is praise. There's all the things that are in there. Do something with the praise. And actually, if you get the result of this failing, you just get that. So it's not that useful, but anyway, there it is. And then finally, the follow-up actions, right? So I'll just run a test on this so we don't have to wait for ages. And I'll go into my demo channel. So this is just an ordinary team, and I'm going to start by @tagging praise. Right, so you get this: show gratitude for peers who went above and beyond at work. And I'll click that, and we see the choices here. So there's quite a few. Let's go awesome, the rainbow. And we can put in one of my esteemed colleagues, Rachel. She's great. And whoops. Got to click in the right place. Demo praise for NZ Business Application Summit 21. Text goes in here, whatever, just some stuff. You can write quite a lot in there. And you press preview, and it shows you what it's going to look like. And you press send, and that will just post that praise into the channel. And all going well, that triggers my flow. It ran successfully, but it's not showing me that. Am I the only one that has this? Right. Anyway, we'll go back to that in a second. As you can see, those follow-up actions there, it says the praise has been added to the praiseometer. Will has given 4 praise this year. Keep them coming. Oh, please. Every time you do a demo, right? It's always going to do that. Let's see if we can get into the run history there. Okay, well, anyway, it worked. Oh, here we go. Yep. So we've triggered when the channel message is added. We've got through these steps. There's the attachment content there, decoded from the original. If we go back up to the raw output of the trigger, we'll find that the content of the attachment there is in that serialized format. It's not, you can't process that. So decode it. Is it in the right format? True. Yep. Do our filtering. Did the output contain anything? Yes, it did. And then do something for each mention, which we only had one here. So we'll get the details of the mentioned user. There's Rachel. And as you can see, the input is actually the Azure AD GUID of the user, not the UPN. That's what you get out of a mention in the payload from a Teams message. You don't get the name of the person or the UPN or anything like that. You get that Azure AD GUID, but thankfully the Office 365 users get user or whatever it is can process it just fine. And then add it to the SharePoint list and follow up. So we get all the praise for this year. There it all is. and reply with the count here, 4. And then we've refreshed the data set. So now if we go back into the channel, I can go to the praiseometer. This is my Power BI report, and this should load in a couple of seconds, and all going well, it will have that latest praise on it. So we should see here there's 4 in total. So let's see. Yeah, there it is, right? So I've left Rachel 2, and a couple of my other colleagues have had 1 each. So I was going to go into a little bit of the Power BI report as well. I do appreciate that this is the Power Automate track, and if you're that interested in Power BI, you'd probably be listening to Razor Rad on the other channel right now. But if there is any interest in that, I can just show how it works. So this is it. All it's doing really is connecting to that SharePoint list. If I open up the query editor, I can show you the small amount of processing that we've done in Power Query to get to where we are. So let's just refresh it so it's got some more data in there. I'm probably going to regret pressing refresh, aren't I? Oh no, here we go. So yeah, here's our source, SharePoint list. We navigate to that specific list, rename some columns. I think that's an automated step when you add a SharePoint list to a Power BI report. Drop a whole heap of columns, right? Because the SharePoint list contains all of that hidden metadata that you don't need. So we've dropped everything from, to, praise type, message, and created. And as you saw right at the beginning, I created those just as string columns. You can store names in the person columns, but it's more trouble than it's worth, because you've then got to go and collapse those objects and get the data out of them and everything. It's a pain, right? So just put the names in. They're all just text. And then there's this created date here. You might notice the timestamps, it's UTC because it's in SharePoint. Change the type of the columns. And then I've got this custom function here. So this is a UTC to NZST conversion. So I found basically an American version of this on one of the Power BI forums and adapted it to New Zealand. So all we're doing basically is feeding a date time into this, and then just establishing whether it's summer or winter based on whether the date is, you know, any time after 2 AM on the last Sunday of September, or the dates on the first Sunday of April prior to 3 AM. And we just basically set a Boolean variable to true or false, and then add 12 or 13, depending on whether it's winter or summer. So we're converting from UTC to New Zealand Standard Time with daylight savings, rather than just the easy option of just adding 12 to the time, right, which can be 1 hour out at half the year. So that's this custom function that gets run across the date column. So we invoke this custom function. So I've got the original created date there in UTC, and there's the time in New Zealand time after running through that custom function. And then I just drop the original UTC column because it's no longer needed, right? So that's where we are. And then there's a date table as well. This is pretty simple, really. So we just got a couple of queries that just get basically sort that given column ascending, and drop everything else and take the first row and turn it into a date, not a date time, and then just sort it the other way and do the same thing. So we've got an earliest and a latest date, and then in this query here, this date table, we just basically create a list using number.from, and that will just construct a date table here. So fairly standard Power BI stuff we've got there. And then in the report itself, we've got, you know, just, these are really standard. They're just column charts and a pie chart, but we've got all time in the last year, this year, and in the last month. And these are measures here. So if I look at in the last month, for example, we take basically the all. So that's in the last month of all, and then see we've used the all function here to exclude from any context filtering based on what people have clicked on, and then the same again, but without the all. So when on these dials here, this isn't a very good example because it's all in the last month. I only built this the other day, but you can set the maximum value to be the all, and then the value. So this value is the filtered one, and the maximum value is the all. So that when you click on someone's name, it will show you their proportion of the total. And I can actually demonstrate that in our live one if anyone is that interested. And it's the same basically for all of these this year, in the last year, just slight variations on using this edate function to give us a bit of a measure. That's why I called it the praiseometer, because it's kind of like a speedometer. And if I've got the ability to very quickly show you what it looks like in anger, I will do that. There we go. So this is a screenshot of what it looks like actually in our environment. So this has been running for, I don't know now, quite a while. It's been running since probably either late 2019 or early 2020, and it's been collecting praise since then. So as you can see, there are some people here that leave a lot. This guy here, Jamie, he's the head of the service desk, and he's really good at that kind of stuff. And as we go further down the list, we find the likes of me. I'm not that great at leaving praise. There I am, sort of middling along in the middle of the rankings. But yeah, as time goes on, you can start to build up a really good picture, and you can reward people based on this data really easily as part of your KPIs, or just part of creating a fun office environment. And then in the actual report itself, in the proper report that I've done internally, I also take our Office 365 users. So we've got a Power BI data flow, which is basically using the Office 365 connector in Power BI just to grab a list of users in the organization, and then transforming that so that account enabled equals true is filtered. And then what we do in the visual that shows the received praise is we filter it by the praise to is in that list of names. So when someone leaves the company, their praise no longer gets counted towards the total. It doesn't feature in the received praise. You don't see it in there anymore after they've left. But any praise that they have left during their time in the company still gets counted towards the totals of other people's received praise, because you don't want to punish somebody. Well, it's not really punishment, but you don't want to punish somebody for one of their colleagues leaving, right? Like if I've received 5 praise from someone and they go, I don't want that to come off my record, right? But I also don't want that person who left to be sitting there in the stats as, in the received praise stats. You want them gone. So we just use the Office 365 users connector for that, and just some filtering in Power BI to achieve it. Pardon me. So yeah, I'll just open up the real one of these, and you can see how it works in practice. Hopefully the slides are quick enough. Okay, it's not. Oh, here we go. So does anyone have any questions while we're waiting for this? Anything that I could explain in more detail, or anything else?
Well, just a question on my side. What was the sort of the uptake in terms of people sort of looking at that sort of capability, and sort of how long did it take for people to get used to sort of leveraging that?
It pretty quick, actually. Yeah, it was well received, and because it was the boss's idea, it kind of he promoted it. So our CEO up in Hawke's Bay does a monthly all of business meeting update, which we use Teams for. Even though we're all sat at our desks, we all join in Teams because it creates a bit of a nicer environment than everybody sitting around a camera in a meeting room, across these various sites. And he promoted it in that, and it's really clear, because when you do leave praise, there's that response that says that you've left 5 praise this year or 40 praise this year or whatever. People know that it's being recorded, and they can see, even if they don't pay attention to the names of all the tabs at the top of the channel, they can still see that, and there's a link to the praiseometer as well. And what I've also done is on our intranet, on the start page, the home page of our intranet, there's a smaller version of it. I call it the mini praiseometer. So it's just a hidden page in the report that's referenced by the SharePoint web part, Power BI web part, which is just a cut down version that fits in this, like the narrower one of the 3-column layout in SharePoint. So every time somebody goes onto our, the home site of our intranet, they will see it. So when we first implemented it, that was the big one. Like, I could see from the analytics that the mini praiseometer was the one that was being hit more than anything else. But as time's gone on, that's sort of stayed steady, or it's just tracked with SharePoint adoption. But the access to the main page, which is what I've got shared up here, climbed quite quickly. Yeah, so if I click on, say, myself, there we go. I've received 10 praise in all time, 4 in the last year, and 2 this year, and none in the last month. I'm not the most praised person in the organisation, but there it is. And this is the difference between the filtered all praise, which is 453, and the one without the all, that's taking in the filter context, is the 10 there. So for any metric, we've got those fixed top line values that the praiseometer runs off. And another thing as well I haven't shown as well is just a tooltip page. So if I clear the filters for any oh, come on, there we go. Clear the filters, and there we go. Right. So if I hover a mouse, oh, pardon me, my machine is so slow. If I hover the mouse over one of these bars, we should get the tooltip, which will show basically a filtered version of the other chart, but it's not working at the moment because yeah, there we go. Right. So if I hover the mouse here, I can see the sent by appears for each person. So there we go. We can see a filtered version of the sent by chart just by hovering the mouse using a tooltip page without actually having to click on it. But if I do click on it, that bottom one will, go there. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. What are we at? 1:45? I think that's about right. I've got, another 10 minutes for any more questions, or if anybody wants to know anything. No?
That was a great session. It's really good to see all of that. So in terms of, sorry, I'm just setting up my environments. Sorry, start my camera. You can see me now. Awesome. So what is your recommendation for sort of other organizations that are keen to have sort of such a feedback system in there, and especially if they're looking at sort of building it themselves?
I have written a blog post which is a little bit out of date actually. I wrote it back before trigger conditions were a thing, so it's got a bit of unnecessary. I think now I've got this presentation, I might update the blog post. But if you are interested, it's willpage.dev, and you can search for praise in there, and you'll find the article that I wrote. So you can follow that. Now, what I would suggest doing is 2 things. One, not following it, because you can use trigger conditions to significantly cut down on the amount of work. And another thing I've done in that blog post as well is I've used person columns in SharePoint instead of just string columns. I've improved it for this demo. So I will update that in due course. So if you're interested in implementing it, just wait and I'll update the blog. But you can follow it exactly now and it will work. It's just unnecessarily complicated. Now, another thing I would suggest doing as well is if you've got quite a lot of Teams adoption, and especially different departments that run their own channels, is that you have a single flow that triggers basically just with those conditions, and then passes the payload into a child flow. So you just want to establish that it's praise, or just do the first bit, the trigger with the conditions, and then pass that into a child flow that does all the processing. And you'd probably add a column to your SharePoint list, which would indicate what the team was that it came out of, or something like that. So then you can set up multiple flows with the different channels and teams, because the when a channel message is added trigger only lets you specify one channel in one team, right? So in our organization, that's fine, because all the praise just goes into the general channel of the org-wide team. But if you're in a larger organization, you might want to set up multiple parent flows that get triggered for each of those different channels, and then just feed the results into a child flow that's going to do all the processing. So you're using that dry methodology, instead of replicating the same flow over and over again. As easy it may be just to go copy and change the channel name in the drop down. If something happens, which it has, in about a year ago, Microsoft changed the format of the adaptive card, and it broke, and I had to go and fix it in the flow to get it working again. And you really wouldn't want to be doing that once if you've got multiple channels. So use your dry methodology to trigger and then pass the payload through into a child flow.
That sounds really good. And this is one of the things that I always sort of talk about, and I really like to see in conferences, is best practices and lesson learned. So, just knowing how to factor your or refactor your sort of Power Automate and sort of your different interactions between the different components. And this is more of a sort of a general question. What I usually say is that whenever it comes to low-code pro-dev type of development, there is decades of experience out there. There are tons of tools, from static analysis to books written about best practices and design patterns and so on. But for anything that is low-code, no-code, it's relatively new to the industry, and people are gaining sort of the grasp of how to build it and what does best practice look like. And how do you get someone new on board to start following those best practices, or to understand what best practices are? Do you have any advice in that space?
Yeah, listen to what Paul has to say. Okay. His session this morning on supportability in Power Apps is just brilliant, right? If everybody worked like that, then yeah, and it's a struggle we've all got. I mean, I started at Tribe as the only person in the business improvement team, and I could just do what I like. And yeah, it's easy, especially when you've got customer deadlines, or you've started to get close to your project budget. What do you drop off first, right? The documentation and the error control, the error handling. You take away the bits that don't contribute towards the functionality of the solution. So it's important to make sure that you've got a framework that everybody can work towards, and you've got it documented, and that you also allow enough time in your budgets to actually do it. And it's the most boring bit, isn't it? No one wants to sit there commenting their code. They just want to hack it out and get it working, don't they? But you need to have it. So it's an important part of it, and something that we've got here. If I go into this here, so this is I've only got a couple of seconds left. I'll just keep this quick. So this is our work, right? So this is live. So I've got this error notifications channel in our business improvement team, and I've got this file that I've put in here, and it's called the Logic Apps Error Framework, and it's a description. So anybody that works for us, and there's 5 of us in our team, they can come here and see exactly what they need to do to put standard error handling into any Logic Apps or flows that they create, right? So there's a description of how it works. What have you got to do? how to do it using scopes and add an HTTP action to post the the details of the failed step. And I've just put the whole code in. So if you're working in Logic Apps, for example, you can just copy this, paste it into Notepad++, and just do a find and replace on it, and go back into the designer view, and it'll work, right? Because all of your things like your run afters and everything are all, you just change them with the find and replace. And then that, and then a whole bunch of stuff that we do actually within the what happens. So the receiver does all this stuff here, creates a file, and posts in here. So anytime something fails in the environment, we've got a notification for it. This is what it looks like. So I can see I've got a flow. We use a SaaS product called Quila for our quotes, and when someone signs one, when a customer signs one, it triggers a Zapier zap of all things. It's the only choice that you've got, which I can then use that zap to send an email that gets monitored by an inbox, and I put some details of the Quila proposal in, which you can then use to look up the JSON. It's really complicated and it fails all the time because it's just mad. So so that's why you're seeing this Quila accepted thing being highly featured in our failed thing. But yeah, so anytime something happens, if it's our new customer onboarding process, which is like a series of about 5 Logic Apps that all get triggered when planner tasks are completed at various stages through the onboarding process. And if anything fails in those, we get the notification here. And so everybody who's in this team who's a Power Platform developer can just jump straight on this and go and figure it out and go and fix the problem and rerun the flow or the Logic App before it's too late. And combining something like that with a framework like Paul's done, of naming your controls this particular way, and don't ever use hidden controls in your Power Apps. Document it, make sure that every member of your team is aware of it, and review each other's work as well before you go live, and just make sure everybody's doing the same thing. Yeah, and it's hard, and as the team grows, that's something that's just kind of loomed up on us, and I haven't been particularly good with it, and this was part of a sort of reckoning as well, having to put this together, because it gets away from you, right? And then you've got to go and do something about it.
Absolutely. And like, my wish list has always been to see if we can leverage the solution checker and see if we can improve that over time so that it can actually identify some of those sort of static ways that we're implementing. So a very good example that you gave is sort of create child flows and then link those to a parent one. I've heard Microsoft talk about some of their customers having those sort of flows with thousands of actions that are happening in there. So, all those little components that they add them next to each other. And there's no way to tell someone who's relatively new to the platform that this is bad design or this is bad practice, to give them that feedback, straight away, saying you need to look into it, or through a pipeline, like, if you submit your code and then it goes back into your sort of repository or exported as a solution, then, calling solution checker programmatically with a specific of predefined rules that we have control over that would say this is too big, or this is, my background is in C#, so you've got something like ReSharper or even Visual Studio that can tell you, hey, that piece of code looks exactly like that other piece of code that you got in there. Recommend refactoring it and follow the dry principle. To have those constructs in the Power Platform, Power Automate, and even on forms or Canvas apps would be really useful. But yeah, hopefully this is a maturity that will come over time.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions on the call? No, looks good. So, Will, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. It was a pleasure having us with you. Feel free to stay for the rest of the session. But we've got sort of Mohammed getting ready after you. So I'm just going to sort of put his slide up, and then Mohammed, maybe at the top of the hour when you're ready, we'll start sharing.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys.